Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay, by Robert Frost. The Outsiders, by S.E. Hinton.
Woo! We're doing The Outsiders!
We are. So we didn't want to read the blurb because we wanted to read the poem instead.
Yeah, I think it's more thematically appropriate, for sure.
So I want to preface this book by saying that we grew up
loving this book.
Loving and talking about this book for multiple reasons. A, it's a really good book. And B, we are from Tulsa.
Yeah.
And our grandpa went to the same high school as S.E. Hinton. Not at the same time, but the same high school. And then
And was a greaser. During the time period she was writing about.
And then our great aunt, his sister, actually went to school with S.E. Hinton. So
she graduated with S.E. Hinton.
They aren't like friends, but
but yeah, it's like it's a big part of like
our family's culture.
Our family's culture and history, and it's also a big part of YA literature's history in a lot of ways, like in two respects. And the first respect, it's important for us because we both grew up analyzing this book together. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those early YA books where you learn about symbolism and theming, and it's part of the story, and it's really well laid out. And it's also a really good, gender reveal for all the kids in the class, for S.E. Hinton is a lady, for those of you who didn't know.
Her publishers actually thought that people wouldn't believe that a woman wrote it, so they decided to do S.E. Hinton as the name on the published book, which she actually really enjoys now because she likes her privacy.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and I studied this. We went to school in Arkansas for part of our life, and I actually read this in one of my English classes in Arkansas and studied it. And it just always stuck with me.
Yeah.
I used to read it every year, and my family calls me the soulless rock because I don't cry during stuff. But this was that book that, I always knew that I was going to cry at the end.
It's the way she purges her emotions.
It's true. And so I was a little bit nervous going into this analytically because I thought it was going to be a little bit difficult to analyze it, and I wasn't sure how my emotional reaction to this book was going to affect that, which was surprising. This is the first time I've ever read this book and not cried. Mm-hmm. And I think we can kind of get into the reasons for that later, but it was definitely interesting. So just kind of talking about S.E. Hinton a little bit. She's from this area. She started the book when she was 15. Well, essentially, she had the concept for the book when she was 15. She was walking home with one of her friends, and someone called them a greaser, and she was surprised by that, didn't realize that they were a greaser, and kind of took some steps back and decided to write a story because she was angry about it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even about writing a book. She wanted to just write down her feelings, and it kind of morphed into The Outsiders, which she really mostly worked on when she was 16, published, and it revolutionized YA fiction.
Yeah.
So, yeah, get it, S.E. Hinton.
And for those of you who think we're overstating the influence of The Outsiders as a piece of young adult fiction, I would ask you, can you think of an older young adult novel at all? Because I can't. And I'm racking my brain. It's such a big deal in young adult fiction, and it's because.
And it was real. It was the first, at the time there wasn't really, you either read
anything like it.
You read kind of kids books or you read adult books, and there wasn't really any in between bridge. And maybe there were a few books, but it wasn't anything real. This was the first real book written for and by young adults.
Exactly.
And
I think it strikes a chord because of that, because it's so authentic.
Yeah.
From beginning to end.
Yeah, I agree.
But, so S.E. Hinton, interesting lady, still does a lot of outreach stuff.
Like we said, our grandpa was a greaser at the same high school, and he actually kind of vaguely reminds me of one of the characters in the book, Two-Bit. He's very much, sorry if you're listening to this, Grandpa, but you already know. He doesn't know what a storyteller. You like to be funny. You are, he is very... He's always telling a story. He always has something to say, and they say something in the book Two-Bit would get in trouble with the cops because he couldn't keep his mouth shut because he wanted to make them laugh, and that is our grandpa
100%.
So, like, I could totally see him in this setting. And it's weird because we'll be talking to him on the phone and he'll just say, oh, yeah, that's where the socials used to hang out, blah, 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 blah. And I'll be like, and I'll have to, like,
take a step back
and be like, oh, yeah. That was real.
We were talking about hair in particular and how important it was to him when he was young. And we'll talk about this in the context of the book too. But like, he told me a story about how he used to walk around the school with they used to do a thing with the back of their hair when it got really long called a ducktail. And it was a way to show you were a hood, you were a rebel. And so he would have a ducktail on the back of his pompadour, like on the back of his head. And the principal would come by and tell him to comb it out, and they'd make you comb it out. And as soon as he would leave, he'd be like, he'd fix it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's just sort of spark of rebellion is so familiar to me. And it makes these characters feel a lot more real because I have the context of what kind of person is these kids.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't know if that helps us get it more because it's universally loved. Like it is a beloved book, but it definitely hits an extra chord whenever you know people from that setting.
I think so.
Even if they're not in the book, they're in the book.
Even just being from here, I think, makes it, because I don't know anyone who hasn't read this book.
Yeah.
And I can definitely say, talking about this podcast to people I've worked with, I've had a lot of people say, I've literally never heard of any of those books.
Yeah.
And it's
a lot of people, but every single person I told we were doing The Outsiders was like, okay, The Outsiders, that's a touchstone. I can, it's really great. And, you know, being from here, again, you get the feel of the setting really, really well, which we'll talk about more when we get to setting, but I do want to talk about our picture clues. I actually took a picture. One of our clues was from the Admiral Twin, which is actually where they filmed part of The Outsiders, the movie, and I actually, in true greaser fashion from my roots, broke onto the property to take pictures.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're closed until spring.
That's hilarious.
There's like a big, basically like a cow rail fence, and I just ducked right on through it and took pictures and then bounced.
It's like, screw you, fence, I'm short.
I felt like Dally. I'm like, I'm coming in.
Yep. Apparently that hole in the fence is still there, by the way.
Interesting.
That's the rumor I've heard.
Interesting. So, yeah, it's interesting. The characters feel so real, especially Pony Boy, our main character. He is very real. He feels,
he's definitely, I want to say, he feels like the author and certain character.
Yes, definitely. Lots of, here is my opinion moments, which is fine, but...
Yeah, and that's, I think, part of what lends it such an authentic air to the voice of the story, because it's a very lived experience, and it's a very... actual teenager's voice.
Yeah, and he feels like a young boy trying to fit in with older kids a lot. And I think she did that really well. I don't know if she's got older siblings. I didn't look into it, but it definitely felt, as a younger sibling, it definitely felt real of, I'm the tag-along to my sibling and their friends.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm not getting mad at you. It's just, it was a very real feeling of, I'm older, I seem older, and I get to hang out with the older kids. And even though my sibling's friend may not want me around all the time, I get to come around all the time because I'm close with my sibling.
Exactly.
And that was a very, very real, well-written experience to me. And then on top of that, him acting older at times, and then whenever he didn't do something the way they would have done it, them commenting on his age. That felt very, very real.
Them realizing his age a lot was interesting because they realized a lot, we're corrupting this child. These characters are literally corrupting this child. Yeah. And they would know it, and they're like, but are we though? Are we giving him, or are we giving him tools? Is it the world? Yeah, or are we just giving him tools, man? Yeah. And that's definitely would be, Dally's philosophy, for sure. But I think Pony Boy is a very sensitive young man. He's not like the other girls.
He is not like the other girls.
He's very smart and good at school, but he's kind of a flake and kind of...
He's a cusper.
He's a cusper.
A cusper. On the cusp. He's on the... he's a cusper. You never heard that?
No.
Maybe I made that up. I don't know. But yeah, he's on the cusp of being an academic, but he's also on the cusp of being a hood. He's a cusper. He lives on the
edge.
fence of two realities. And she writes that really well, which we'll get into later. But he's a very interesting character. And when I was younger, I felt very close to Ponyboy. Mm-hmm. I felt very much I understood him because I was not a greaser, but I was sort of an equivalent.
Yeah.
And so were you. We were
kind of ratty ass kids. Sorry. we were wild kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I was like an emo kid, and you were like a goth kid, punk kid, and we were kind of outskirters, and like we were outsiders, if you will.
We've definitely always really identified with countercultures, I think.
Mm-hmm. So I really felt close to Ponyboy, and when I read this book in 8th grade, I was a cheerleader who, when I wasn't in my cheer outfit, was an emo kid. Mm-hmm. So I was very much that weird in-between of two worlds. Yeah. And so when I read this book, it really resonated with me a lot. And Ponyboy especially resonated with me a lot because I was kind of an academic kid. We read a lot.
It's hard to talk about it this analytically.
Yeah, it's a very emotional book to me. But I think that speaks volumes to, at such a young age, her ability to emotionally connect with her readers through her style, which we'll get to again.
And still now, as an adult, I felt very connected to these characters. But it's funny.
It's more nostalgic.
Well, I actually found myself connecting more to
Dairy.
Me
too.
And so did Dally.
And Dally, yeah.
Dally was a lot more interesting to me as a character.
As an adult.
Because I think...
When I was younger, I thought he was very cool and grown up. And now that I'm older, I thought he was very young and lost.
I was like, what a sad story. And I think that's the point of Ponyboy's narration is like, Johnny's death is sad for one reason, but Dally's death is sad for another reason entirely.
Yeah, and we can kind of get into that, but let's talk about Johnny,
Johnny Cakes
is so sweet and doesn't deserve anything bad and gets all of it.
Yeah, he's the kick the whoopee.
You know, it's so upsetting to me. It was upsetting to me as a kid, but now as an adult, especially upsetting to me that he legitimately did get all the bad breaks in life. Yeah. And then he died. Mm-hmm. Like, there was no...
But that's a really important...
lesson.
Like, that was important.
It's radical.
For the story. Yeah. I definitely think, like, Johnny, I think, was an underwritten character, to be fair.
He's understated. I don't know that he's underwritten.
I think he's underwritten because I don't think Johnny has his own personality.
Really?
Really. I think Johnny... The only personality we see from Johnny comes from Ponyboy talking to Johnny.
I feel differently, actually.
Okay.
I think that Johnny is very, very introspective. The few times that he talks, he doesn't just agree with Ponyboy, and he doesn't just disagree with Ponyboy, and he gives insight to some of the discussions they have. I think he's an overthinker. I think he sits in his head and he analyzes, and when he's soft-spoken, he doesn't speak a lot, which is said.
Yeah.
But when he does, it's because he's been mulling. Mm-hmm. That is the impression that I get of Johnny, is that he mulls. He sits and he agonizes over things and he thinks about them, and he's very self-actualized for where he's at in life.
That's a good point. I think, I don't know, I feel like we don't get to see him say much, or like we don't get to see a lot of him interacting with people. Mostly what we see we don't see anything. We just hear what Ponyboy says about him.
Yes, but I think it's important to know what Ponyboy does say about him, which is that he is quiet, he is introverted, and that when he does speak up, it is a big deal. But not in the, like, you know, when Fang laughs, it's a big deal because he's so brooding. It's he's very quiet, so he doesn't speak up much. And Ponyboy, as much as I like him as a character, is very self-centered and
he's very
self-aware. Not self-aware. That's not
the opposite of self-aware.
It's very much about him and how he's being perceived and what people think of him. And while we do get his opinions on other characters, it's an unreliable narrator because it's first person. We're not getting Johnny's thoughts and feelings, but I certainly felt like what was said about Johnny and to Johnny, and the few times we did see him interact, I felt like he very much did have a personality.
Okay.
Like, I would almost love to see a book in his perspective, because in my opinion, he is constantly thinking, and he may not be good at school necessarily, but I think he's really smart.
I don't disagree with that point, and I think that's definitely implied, especially with the whole discussion about the Robert Frost poem, because the poem was something that Ponyboy always had a hard time understanding, but Johnny immediately got it.
Yeah.
And
even same with Gone with the Wind. They're reading it, and he's saying, these Southern gentlemen, and they're gallant, and like sort of talking about these things. But then very gallant and very, he's just talking about Gone with the Wind and how some of the different themes in that. Even he is, and Ponyboy even says in the text, like, Johnny may not have been very good at school, but when he was interested in something, he really dug in. Yeah. And I think that's something that, had we had a reliable narrator, we would have learned that Johnny is very introspective and constantly thinking.
Yeah, that's fair. I will say, Johnny, another important fact about Johnny, and one thing I do like about his character, in the end especially, is his parents are abusive. His mother is emotionally abusive, and his father is physically abusive. So when he's in the hospital dying, he refuses to see his mother. And she starts yelling about what an ungrateful kid he is while he's dying in the hospital.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it was such a power move for him to be like, no, she can't come in here. I'm not.
Which is, it's growth for him too. Like, he's one of the characters, other than Ponyboy, I think, that had the most growth. Because even when they save the kids, after they save the kids, he has, like, opinions about, like, I can do good things, and I can be a good person, and even if I die, I've given these kids a chance at a good life. And he is constantly asking about his parents. Did they want to come see me? Were they worried about me when I went missing? Do they care? And then at the very end, he's like, I don't want to see them. I want to see my real family.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that was a lot of growth.
Yeah, that's true.
We don't really we see growth in Derry. We see some growth in the other characters. But
Dally, we see a lot of growth in Dally, just not positive growth.
Yes.
Which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. But in terms of, like, positive character growth, we really see, I guess, Cherry a little, but mostly I don't really see that. I see Randy.
Cherry doesn't grow,
Johnny,
and that's the point of her character.
Yeah. I see Randy, I see Johnny, and I see Ponyboy. I don't really see any other positive, like, big positive character growth.
That's true. Because Cherry's just the metric by which we see Ponyboy's growth, because she doesn't change, and then we see how much he's changed in relation to her.
So, and I think we kind of skipped ahead on accident. That was my bad. I wanted to talk about people, but
that's okay.
I do want to take a moment to go back and just talk about, like,
themes.
Very, very quickly talk about the themes, because we're going to be talking about them as we talk about the characters.
Yeah. So we'll start with gallantry. It's explicitly brought up because it's a theme in Gone with the Wind. But in relationship to the character of Dallas, Johnny sees those gallant Southern gentlemen portrayed in the book in someone like Dallas. And I think...
And so does Cherry.
But I also think Ponyboy sees those qualities in Johnny.
I agree.
He sees those qualities in Johnny, and he sees those qualities in Soda Pop
a lot.
Because he sees in Soda Pop someone who's charming,
heroic,
who cares, who's interesting. And
he even expressly states it in the book at one point, but he didn't see Dally that way, because Dally doesn't...
is a jerk.
He's an asshole, but he is heroic in a sort of he's kind of an anti-hero in a lot of ways of their society, I guess, if you will. And I think Ponyboy has a hard time with that, because he kind of reminds me a little bit of our, like, book of 3 of Taryn, of him meeting his hero and him not being what he expects. Yeah. And this idea of young men having this idea of what a hero is, and then sort of having to reevaluate that. And I think Ponyboy was reminiscent of that to me.
I think Ponyboy is reminiscent of that, but I also think we see a lot of Ponyboy. Ponyboy reevaluates what his heroes are, but I think Dally was never someone he hero worshipped. Yeah. Johnny hero worshipped Dally.
Yeah, he did. No, I don't think that Ponyboy did, but at the very end, he finally saw what Johnny was saying. Yeah. And that's what I mean in terms of, like, and he even says,
not going down without a fight kind of mentality. And that is a big thing that comes up again and again in the stories, that sort of, we're not going down without a fight. We're not going to, it's that very rebel with a cause or rebel without a cause sort of thing that you associate with like James Dean and 50s greasers and like that sort of post-war like anxiety that young people had.
And them growing up, which is another theme in the book. Definitely
aging is a big one. And like age in general comes up a lot because it's Ponyboy is younger than everybody else in the group. So we see everything filtered through sort of his ideas of the world. Yeah. So there are some things that we only kind of get like glimpses of. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's growing up throughout the book, so you're getting more and more clear sort of, it's like kind of a lens coming into focus throughout the book, which I always love books that do that well.
Yeah. Other than aging, we have sameness and differences, like that will come up with when we talk about Sherry, especially, I think. Not Sherry, Cherry.
Her name is Sherry.
I know, but like...
They all call her Cherry because of her hair.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And, you know, the Socias versus the Greasers as well. And sameness versus difference.
Exactly. And that comes up, and that'll come up with Randy as well, and talking about Bob and Dallas. We also want to talk about, like, the nature of family as a theme in the story is a big one. We already kind of touched on it when we talked about Johnny, or you did. But it does come up with all of the Greasers, the sort of discussion of real family versus manufactured family. And for Ponyboy, that means both. He has both. And whereas before he thought all he had was like the family he manufactured. And someone like Johnny thought all he had was the family that he was stuck with. And you sort of have this sort of conjoining growth in there.
And I think Dally, too, like, he has,
his family was Johnny.
Yeah, that was his family. Sure. That was the only person that he cared about in the world, kind of. And and I think it's really interesting that he kind of is... I always really, really resonated with Dally when I was younger, but I wasn't sure why.
You were an angry kid.
I was kind of an angry kid, but also, like, I talked about earlier, you know, I always cried during this book when I was younger. And I usually got upset when Johnny died, and I would tear up and maybe a leak a tear or two. But I always, like, ugly cried when Dally died. And I couldn't ever, like, I just thought it was because he died, but it wasn't really because he died. Yeah. I cried because Dally broke. Yeah. He broke when Johnny died. And that, to me, was so sad that he only cared about this one person in the world. That was his only soft spot. And then he lost it, and he couldn't...
You can't live without those soft spots,
and he couldn't function anymore. Yeah. And he broke. And that was, to me, so sad when I was younger. And now that I'm older, I understand, like, just how sad that is. But I think I, as a person, have changed, and so it wasn't as heartbreaking to me. I was more sad when I read Johnny's letter this time than when Dally died. And I thought it was really interesting because that visceral, like, really intense reaction that I used to have to Dally dying did not happen.
I wonder if that's an aging-related thing. Like, because we're older now and the world has been kind of recontextualized for us, we see their perspectives differently because we have a little more space from when we were that age. And I think someone like Dally, we look back on as older people now and think of someone like that as pitiable, maybe. Or we recognize the pride.
He's an angry young man who is just
the angry. Pride is the problem. Yeah. And that's what you, I think, resonated with when you were a kid, was his sense of pride snapping. And because you've always been really a proud kid. You know, you were. And I definitely saw...
No one can see your nervous face right now. I'm
so
not mad
uncomfortable.
about it.
I'm so uncomfortable. But I think now reading Johnny's letter and, like, recontextualizing his character, it's definitely a a lot more of a mature part of the story, I think.
Yeah, it's
like that
definitely,
sadness.
I looked at it in a totally different direction. Because I read
Maybe
this...
it's because we're old and we're closer to death.
Well, maybe. I read it every year from when I read it the first time in 8th grade to pretty much early college, and every time I cried. And then I haven't really read it since then. So this is my first time in probably 5 years sitting down and reading this book.
My first time since I was a teenager.
But that distance, not just emotionally from the book, but also
like time.
As an adult, that time that has passed, I felt like I was watching this, I felt like I was reading this book from a totally different angle. Like I was reading it backwards or something. It was totally different to me. It was still great and it was still familiar, but it was completely different reading this as an adult. And the emotional maturity of Essie Hinton to capture this as a young woman, as a 16-year-old woman, is
just incredible.
Impressive.
Like her writing abilities are just outstanding. But anyway, moving on.
Sorry.
So let's talk about soda pop, baby.
All right. I love soda pop.
Okay, so you have a type.
I loved soda pop when I was a kid, and I love soda pop now.
Soda pop is the middle sibling. It's Ponyboy's of his older brothers. And he is a high school dropout because he was never very good at school. He's extremely handsome. He works at the local, like, mechanics garage place. And he mostly just goes to work and he's in love with his girlfriend. And that's a sad story that I did not pick up on as much when I was younger.
I didn't either. I thought they just broke up.
I did too. Like, his girlfriend, Sandy, it's implied in the book that she gets pregnant. They don't say that. They say she went to Florida to live with her. It was
either marry him or go live with her grandparents in Florida. And when I read it, I was like, wait, what? Breaks. And then it says that Soda Pop only loved her and he thought it was reciprocal, but it was not. And the implication, I think, is
that she's having someone else's baby.
Yeah.
That's I don't think it's just implied. I think it's pretty heavily implied that it's somebody else's baby. Which it's interesting because throughout the whole book, it's discussed that Soda Pop is easily the most dreamy boy in town. He's like, everybody thinks he's so attractive. Even the socias think he's attractive. Like, he is a movie star attractive, is what Ponyboy keeps saying. And I always liked Soda Pop because I'm a middle child. Sherry even embarrasses Ponyboy, like, at some point because she's, like, talking about how dreamy him and his brother are. Yeah. And she's like, oh, you guys look so similar. And, like, I can tell you're his brother because he's a doll and you're adorable. And he's so like, dreamy. What? Yeah, she definitely calls him dreamy more than once. And it, like, makes my heart flutter just to watch his reaction. I'm like, oh, that's adorable. He's so cute. And Soda Pop is kind of the emotional rock of the family. Yeah, he's got a good attitude. Ponyboy says he's not in reality a lot, and I don't really think that's the case. I think it's kind of middle child syndrome. As a middle child, he's trying to make everybody happy. Don't make waves. Smooth them. Yep. Keep everybody happy. And I think it's the curse of being a middle child. And I think for him especially, he's one of the few people who can understand where Derry is coming from. But also understand where Ponyboy is coming from. Exactly. And which he eventually says explicitly in the book. Yeah. And he's stuck in this tug of war between these two brothers who are so different. And like, he's a really interesting character because I don't think he's outside of reality so much as Ponyboy thinks. I think he just has a really good attitude and he hides behind humor. Yeah. He's definitely a lot more of a nuanced character than he initially seems. I agree. And Ponyboy worships him for sure. I do think the fact that he's so dreamy is pretty hilarious. Yeah. And the fact that we find out later that Ponyboy is self-conscious about the fact that he is also equally dreamy. But he doesn't think he's dreamy. He thinks he has good hair. Yeah. But then people keep telling him that he's dreamy, and he's like, I don't know about that. Yeah. And gets all, like... Flustered, and it's adorable. It is. It's cute. There's nothing more adorable than a 14-year-old getting complimented. Yeah. For anything. Yeah. Go ahead. You first. Oh, I was going to move on. I was going to move on to Derry. Oh, so was I. So we're on the same page. The oldest brother. So Derry
is really interesting to me. And when I was younger, I was a lot more on Ponyboy's side that Derry was too hard on him. But also I understood a little bit when I was younger that Derry was just doing his best. But now that I am an adult, Derry is 20 years old, supporting 2 young boys. Well, I mean, Soda Pop's kind of helping, but only so much.
Yeah.
Derry is... Their parents died less than a year ago, which I did not realize when I was younger. I did not realize it was less than a year before the start of the book. But he is doing his best to keep everything together.
So hard.
And he wants more for Ponyboy. He wants more for him. Because, and I think too, it's a little bit of like living vicariously because, you know, it's expressly stated that Derry had a scholarship to go to college with athletics. And he and Ponyboy that's one of the few things they have in common is athletics. The fact that, you know, Derry wanted to go to college and couldn't because now he's taking care of his family and he wants that for Ponyboy.
He wants it so hard for Ponyboy.
And because of that, he's really hard on him. And I think, too, like...
And he's still grieving the death of his parents. Like, it states in the text, and I guess I didn't think about this when I was a kid, but him and his dad were extremely
really
close.
Yeah.
And there seems to be some pretty big age gaps between all the kids' ages there. So he probably had dad to himself for a long time. And it's like, it's always a good sign when you're talking about characters as if they had real lives. Yeah. But, you know, I just think it's really, like, a lot more interesting. He's more interesting to me as an adult, I agree. Like, I feel a lot more sympathy towards him, but I also definitely see how she wrote him to be a cocksure 20-year-old dude.
Yeah, I didn't see that as much when I was younger either, but, like, when they go into the fight, he's like, all right.
I'll start this, and it's like, okay.
There were a couple moments, and they talk about him, like, wanting to show off his muscles.
Yeah.
But there were a couple moments where he said things or did things. I was like, oh, you're 20. Like, you're younger than me.
Yeah. Oh, you're a baby. I forgot.
Like, you're a young, you know, and I admire him a lot more now as an adult, too, of stepping into that role and trying to keep his family together and doing whatever he can to make ends meet. Because me, you know, at my age, that I will not disclose.
At my undisclosed age.
But yeah, me, like...
In our disclosed location.
And me, I'm single, you know, but, like, even just making ends meet for myself sometimes is overwhelming. Yeah. So to be 20 years old, I can't even imagine. At 20, I was in college, and, like, and I get people do this at 20 all the time, but... They had no help in this book. They came and they were already didn't have money and they are already on the brink. And like, so the amount of pressure that you know that he's under, that didn't come through as much when I was younger as it does now as an adult.
Yeah. I definitely, and I think part of that is just having the context of adulthood. Yeah. Like that's, I just think it's something that she had some pretty impressive insight into, I think.
I agree.
And it makes me honestly think that she definitely based these characters very strongly off of real people or real scenarios, or she just was that insightful even at 16. Yeah. That she could put herself in that headspace for a character to that extent. Because Derry is my favorite character, probably, I think. And even when we were kids, I think he was probably the one as an oldest kid, I think he's the one I identified the most with. Like, that sort of pressure to make sure everybody's okay at your own expense, at any expense. That's your job. Yeah. You're the oldest. That's your job. Yeah. And it's like, that's so crushing. Like, it's such a crushing weight to live under.
You know, we hear Ponyboy talk about a little bit. He doesn't really remember as much he almost doesn't remember what Derry was like before their parents were gone, kind of. And I think that's where we get that insight of, like, Derry and Ponyboy's relationship and why Ponyboy's comfortable teasing Derry and, you know...
Or Soda Pop, you mean?
What did I say, Ponyboy? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Soda Pop is comfortable teasing Derry and playing that middleman because he has had more time with Derry before.
Yeah, and there's such a huge age gap between Derry and Ponyboy. It's 6 years. Yeah, like that's the age gap. I think the age gap between you and Chris is 8 years, 9, 8. It's 11 for me. Yeah, like our youngest sister is quite a bit younger than us.
And you guys had a really hard time for a long time. Like, not trying to, like, go into therapy on this podcast. Yeah, but I felt like Soda Pop for a long time.
She and I had a hard time connecting for a long time because I don't understand teens
The youth.
The youths. Which is why we're doing this podcast.
So yeah, I think Derry is a lot more nuanced to me now that I'm older. Yeah. I think I saw it when I was younger, but I didn't see it to the extent that I see it now.
Yeah, for sure.
And, the thing that they talk about with Derry, too, my last kind of point about him is he could have been a Soc. He would have been a Soc.
That is something, and they bring that up. Like, one of his buddies from football is the Soc who comes up to fight him in the end, who hates him for not living up to his potential, basically. Yeah. And I think that's interesting. And I think it's also interesting that Derry hates that Soc right back for even
looking down on him. But he also is embarrassed a little bit.
I think so.
But he's embarrassed, but it's like there's still that pride of like, don't look down on me.
Mm-hmm. This is where I'm from. These are my people.
Yeah. This is my roots.
Yeah.
Like, this is where I grew up and where I'm from. And like,
that goes back to that theme of sameness versus differentness and like made family versus real family. It's sort of we're different but also the same comes up a lot in this.
Exactly. But I will say with the Socias especially, I think they're kind of seen as the bad guy of the story. And I think Hinton takes some time to say things are rough all over. But I had an issue with Cherry in specific that I'm going to talk about right now.
Okay.
So, Cherry is a good listener, and she and Ponyboy connect on an intellectual level. Yeah. And they're chatting and they're talking, and she asks what happened to Johnny. Because Johnny is scared of Socias to an extent and is very flinchy, and like something happened that made her realize. So she just kind of is digging a little bit, I think. Yeah. She's pretty socially acute. And so she kind of digs a little bit, and Ponyboy just opens up and is like, these dudes in a blue Mustang pulled up and they beat the crap out of Johnny, and it scared the crap out of him, and he'll never be the same, and neither will I.
We're all traumatized now.
She, in my opinion, this really bothered me. She had the audacity to look at him and say, #not all Socias.
Right.
When she knew that it was her boyfriend.
Her boyfriend who traumatized her. But I do think I feel differently about that scene as an adult, because I'm with you. That always made me mad about her, that she was kind of gaslighting them. And
I don't think she was gaslighting them.
She kind of put them in harm's way to an extent. She knew that Johnny was traumatized by that, and she still let them walk home knowing those boys were out looking for her. The boys that she knew were responsible for causing Johnny's trauma.
Yeah.
Because she's a coward, and that's the point I was making with her as a metric. In the beginning, we see her through Ponyboy's eyes as this very mature, very smart girl, something he aspires to be. And not a girl, but like he likes her. She's pretty. She's nice to him. She's a good listener. This is the world he wants to be in, and the world he could be in if he really focuses on school and stuff. And by the end, he realizes she's just a person. She's actually can be kind of dumb, too, just like I can. And maybe we should all just be a little easier on each other.
I agree with that to an extent.
But that's about Johnny's growth, not Cherry's. Cherry doesn't grow. Cherry is a coward. And without her not having that kind of growth, I don't think we would have Ponyboy, like we wouldn't have that metric to measure him by.
I wouldn't say that she didn't grow at all.
I
think there was some growth there, but I will say, like, she felt very, okay, I'm sorry, and maybe I'm biased because I have some issues with rich people. I had an issue because I felt like she was that girl who plays the victim and cries.
Yeah.
And I don't think she was wrong to cry. Her boyfriend was murdered.
That's true. But
she says explicitly, not all Socias are like that. Or her words. So #not all Socias. After she knows that her boyfriend is the one that did the traumatizing, someone very close to her, not just like some stranger. She's just like, hey, I know the person who did this horrible thing, but we're not all like that.
Yeah.
Things are rough all over. We're all having a hard time. And I think that is a good point to make in the book, that things are rough all over and everyone's having a hard time and everyone's struggling. But I had a really, really, really hard time. When I was younger, I didn't have this hard of a time. Yeah. But as an adult, I had a really hard time feeling for Cherry.
I did not feel sorry for Cherry, really. I think she's a really interesting character.
She is. And there are good things about her.
But that's my, like, she's so real. She seems very real to me.
Yeah.
Because she is that flawed. And like she's deeply, like all of these characters are deeply flawed, but I think her flaws are not discussed really by Ponyboy ever.
Because he doesn't...
They're just answered when they have a conversation in the end. They never talk about what she did wrong. He just forgives her, basically. And it's just really interesting is all.
She is an interesting character, and I don't want to like throw hate at her because I think she's
I wish her best friend had more screen time.
Her best friend was cool. I wanted to see her in Two-Bit with like a buddy cop.
Right? That sounded great.
Like they sounded like
I wanted them to hook up in the end.
But Cherry in specific, she's an interesting character. I think she's definitely a catalyst in the story for things to happen. And I think she feels bad. I don't want to say that she doesn't feel bad, and I think she does see Ponyboy as a person, and she sees Johnny as a person, and that's the point. Yeah, like
she's a flawed human character, and that's a difficult thing to get your pretty girl. What would normally be written as a love interest, probably. And she's certainly a lust interest for our protagonist, I think. But that's more like just realistic boys saying, ooh, pretty girl.
Yeah.
And he's very respectful about it. I think he's intimidated by it. But yeah, I think she's a really interesting character, and she's very much a powerhouse personality, which I like.
And I think she's emotionally astute. Like I said before, I think she is... I
just think she's a coward. She's afraid to examine her own issues in a lot of ways. And she's afraid to confront her own issues.
To be fair, I think that makes sense within the context of her social structure. And that's something that's commented upon several times within the story. And even when we meet Randy later talking about, like, socias are cold. Not necessarily that they're cold people, but their society is cold. It's a very detached way of living, and you can't really be your true self. Yeah. And I think that what Cherry is supposed to be is us seeing the damages of that, of not being able to speak up when something's wrong, of not being able to examine your own flaws out loud because then you would look bad. Sort of this... You
can't look weak.
Exactly.
Like, don't let it show.
Don't let them know. We don't have the rights.
That's okay. It's only for today.
I think Cherry's interesting. Yeah, she doesn't really grow a lot, but I did want to talk about that moment.
We will talk more, too, about that sort of, like, social coldness when we get to the rest of the socias later. Yeah. But, drum roll on this one, Two-Bit is my doing the most character, for sure.
Two-Bit's doing a lot.
Two-Bit is doing a lot. Two-Bit is probably the only other gang member, or the member of Ponyboy's gang that we'll talk about. Because we'll talk about the other ones here in a little bit. But Two-Bit is everybody's funny friend.
Yeah.
And so he's a lot, but I think he's a lot more interesting than you would think at first glance. I think he's a lot more socially astute than he comes across.
I agree.
I also think he has crippling social anxiety because he's drunk a lot.
I think he has a substance problem for sure.
For sure.
He's interesting to me. He steals a lot, too.
Yeah, he's got a stealing problem. You love a stealing character.
I do love a stealing character. I think he also, like Soda Pop, hides behind humor. Yeah. I think he uses humor as a defense and coping mechanism. And I agree. I think that he's very socially aware. I think at the end when Ponyboy breaks the bottle at the end and he's on the verge of becoming something different, Two-Bit's the one that's like, hey,
you need to take a breath.
Don't be like us.
Yeah.
Don't be like us, man. Like, he takes a second. He realizes in that moment, and then, he sees Ponyboy picking up the glass and it starts laughing.
But that's a moment of growth for him because before, he was the one who let Ponyboy get away with, practically murder going to that rumble when he knew he shouldn't have because he was letting them peer pressure him, basically. Yeah. And
then he felt so bad after. And I think that was when he realized, Ponyboy could have gotten hurt. And after everything that happened with Dally and Ponyboy getting really sick, I think he realized that Ponyboy should have stayed home. Yeah. And he should have done what was right for Ponyboy.
Instead of what was right for everybody's rep. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's why in that parking lot he says something. But I think he was aware of it, was kind of my, he was... he's usually aware of what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. But he's the funny man. He has a fancy switchblade.
Yeah.
Briefly.
and that was, specifically talking about him hiding behind humor.
Yeah.
He specifically makes a joke after Dolly dies
about how
he lost his switchblade when the police searched him. And when Steve gets mad, Steve is our lampshade member. He doesn't matter.
Yeah, he's a lamp character.
He doesn't matter. When Steve gets mad at him for saying that, he's like, no, that's not all I care about. I'm pretending that's all I care about right now.
Yeah. Like, it's what I wish was wrong.
Yeah.
It's not what's wrong, it's what I wish was wrong. And, like, that's beautiful line.
As a family who hides behind humor.
Yeah, we come from one of those.
It's very, that was real.
Yeah.
Good line.
So, 2-bit, great character. Mm-hmm. Moving on.
Doing the most.
Doing the most of everybody. There are other gangs.
There are.
The one specifically that gets brought up a lot is Tim Shepard's gang. Mm-hmm. We won't talk too much about them, but they kind of exist to delineate the real hoods from our gang of characters.
Mm-hmm. Our gang's kind of a ragtag group that's on the edge of hooddom. Mm-hmm. But Tim Shepard's gang
is a real gang.
They usually fight with weapons. They're uncomfortable not fighting with weapons. Mm-hmm. And they get into trouble. And if you want to know more about them, she's written some books about them, so.
Yeah, they're very interesting. But, like, it just, I think they're important in the context of the story as characters. Yeah, it's definitely another way she uses the characters in the setting to kind of examine sameness and differentness. Yeah. Because she certainly contrasts them against Bob's gang and the Socias, and uses them as like the other end of the hyper-violent spectrum. Because they are extremely hyper-violent. They're from the worst side of the tracks of everybody. So I think it just bears bringing up that they exist as kind of another yardstick. Yeah. And then there's Bob, Randy, and the Socias and their gang. Bob dies.
You know...
Spoiler.
I know that we're supposed to feel for Bob.
I don't really.
But I never actually do. Mm-hmm. Even whenever Ponyboy finds a picture of Bob and is like, he's a real person that died.
Bob has influenza.
Examine
or affluenza, that's what it was.
Influenza.
Bob has affluenza. And it kills him.
Yeah, he just wants someone to tell him no.
Ugh.
And I kind of just was like, eh.
I'm not convinced about that character.
Yeah.
I think maybe to some extent, I see where she was going with that character, but I don't find that character
in deep enough.
Exactly, because I know that guy she's talking about, the guy she's trying to explain, and that guy, I don't feel bad for him. Yeah. I think he's still kind of a jerk. Yeah. And I think he would have killed Ponyboy. I
think he would have too.
And it would have been finally too far.
Yeah. And he would have gotten away with it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I just think Bob as a character is kind of just evil villainy, and no matter how much nuance she tries to put onto him, the people who are like that are monsters. Yeah. At the end of the day. And it's kind of hard to make them sympathetic. However, I think she succeeds making Randy sympathetic to an extent.
Because I think Randy felt bad.
Yeah.
I don't think Randy would have changed if Bob hadn't died.
Yeah. Well, and I think Randy knew that kid was I think he was probably freaked out at the time, is implied. Because they were really ready to run away. Like... I think the implication is that
he even says they would have killed you.
Yeah, he's like, you were going to die that night if this hadn't happened. And I think no matter what had happened that night, Randy was going to change. Mm-hmm. Because he's a more introspective kind of guy.
Yeah, I agree. And I liked Randy. I think... Yeah. And I think he meets Ponyboy on his level with where he's at.
Yeah, exactly. They're very real with each other.
Mm-hmm. There's no pretense there.
The rest of the Socias in the gang are kind of faceless, nameless. They don't matter that much. They're just fancy.
I think that was probably my biggest issue with trying to sympathize with the Socias in the book, with what Essie Hinton was trying to do.
They were a bit stormtroopery.
And I don't think that was her intention. She wanted them to be sympathetic, but
it's just not enough book.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, like, this is a really short book. It's only like 160-something pages.
Yeah, you read it in one sitting.
And so, I mean, there's a lot to mine in it. It's very dense.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a quick read, and like,
if she had spent more time, maybe.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about in the past about like structure and spending time on fleshing out characters for the sake of the story. And we'll get to it soon, but I do think this is a story that would have probably served from that. Mm-hmm. But we'll get to it.
It's fine without it, but if she really wanted us to be sympathetic to them,
they needed to be fleshed out more effectively. Yeah. And Jerry.
I want to just give a shout out to Jerry.
Jerry's
my
great.
Homie. He's
school
cool.
Teacher Jerry.
He's awesome. Jerry was there when the fire happened. Like, talk like this is real life. So there's a fire in a church. And Ponyboy and Johnny jump in and they save these kids that were trapped in the church. Ponyboy is convinced that they started the fire.
Yeah.
We don't know if they started the fire.
I don't think they did.
It's hard to say, but they may have started a fire. And there were children in this church that was on fire and it was coming down and Ponyboy ran in without even looking. And so did Johnny. And that's how Johnny dies. They like get all the kids out and a beam falls and breaks Johnny's back. And on the way to the hospital, Ponyboy wakes up in Jerry's car. And Jerry's just like, we're taking you to the hospital. And Ponyboy's like, you're not taking us to jail since we're on the run for murder? Mm-hmm. And Jerry's like, no, you saved a bunch of kids. I'm taking you to the hospital. Like, yeah. And Jerry is ride or die from that point forward.
He's definitely a bro, for sure. And he's definitely, like, I don't know about ride or die, but he sees
that they're kids.
Exactly. And he's even like that with Dal, and I think the doctor character too. I mentioned
was like that with Dal. Yeah,
he was very much. He's like, I'm gonna let you back there, but not because you're holding a knife at me, because I know he wants to see you.
Yeah,
and so go on and get back there. And it's just sort of that realizing. I think that was probably a shaky moment for Dally as well.
But we don't know because Ponyboy doesn't care.
No, because Ponyboy is very self-involved. Which is a useful writing technique.
It is. So. This book felt very real.
Part of
I'm not sure how much of that is because I'm from here.
Yeah.
The space, this is a phrase I said when we were talking about it, the space feels very real in the center of an empty map. Like, if I were not from Oklahoma, if I did not live in Tulsa, I don't know if I would know where they are all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I knew when they were at the drive-in where they were. Yeah. And what the scenery looked like.
I've seen movies at that drive-in.
But if I wasn't from here, if I hadn't been to that drive-in, would I know the layout of what's actually happening? Or would I just be kind of like, okay, they're at a drive-in?
I think it's kind of amorphous if you don't have the context. Yeah. I really do. But that being said, you know, I wanted to mention, I feel like Tulsa's having a moment right now.
Yeah, Tulsa's doing good in the media, guys.
Yeah.
We're in everything.
It was really... It's as weird to read this book as someone who lives in Tulsa as it is to watch Watchmen and see our actual Tulsa Police Department police uniforms on these characters.
Well, the old ones.
The old ones. But it's still really weird.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's sort of triggers those immediate memories of seeing Tulsa cops.
Well, and like the gathering place, like we're showing up a lot in the flooding. Man, we're all over the news.
We're all in the zeitgeist right now. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
That we're very relevant today.
But I will say, like, even regardless of whether the space feels amorphous or not, it's very grounded. It feels like a real place, even if you don't know what's going on around.
I will say, East Side and West Side are still determiners in Tulsa.
Yeah.
About where you're from.
And North Side.
And North Side.
And South Side.
And South Side. South Side is new.
Where the Socias would be.
Where the Socias would be now. Which is funny because, like, the West Side now is it's pretty much the industrial side of town. It's across the river. Mm-hmm. So the West Side of Tulsa now is not the rich side of town, but it used to be.
It's migrated to the South Side.
Yeah. It's now in the Jinx-Bixby area.
But East Tulsa is still very much East Tulsa.
Yeah, it's still very much... a
diverse
poorer,
area.
More diverse. Diverser.
It's late, guys.
It's so late. It's almost midnight here.
It is a diverse area, and there are good and bad areas in East Tulsa. However, definitely poor areas.
Of course, I think the area they're talking about, though, in this book is what we would think of as North Tulsa now.
I think so, too. Even going out into that area to
what they would call East Side would be North Tulsa, I think.
Like, even going out to do, like, my picture and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it was...
In that same vein, I would say the West Side's probably the area we live in now. Probably, like, the...
It is, because Grandpa has talked about Socia's hanging out in this area before. I'm not going to tell you where we live, because that'd be weird.
That would be weird. We're not going to talk about that. But we do live on, I would say, Midtown in general. Yeah. Midtown's a pretty big area. We do live in a place, like the district we live in is called Midtown, and it's where I think they're discussing when they talk about the West Side.
I think so as well.
And it's really strange to know that there's, like, these historic analogs, these spaces. And, like, to be fair, the Midtown is still really bougie, and North Tulsa is still really poor and, like, hard. It's a hard place to live. It's not the nice part of town. Yeah. And, like, it's one of those places where some people don't feel safe going there. I think that's silly. But, you know, some people don't. Yeah. And
I think too, like, even the church, like, they go and hide out in church for a while
where you've discovered.
Well, I think based on somebody said that it was essentially Skytook, but they were talking about it, and it felt very much like I could drive up there and take a picture. Like,
it's a real place.
Yeah. So even the church felt real to me, and
very grounded in the world we're in.
And not just because we live here, though I do think that helps, but also because of the way it's written.
I will say that sort of amorphousness of setting that she uses, though, I think it feels grounded because she's using a real space to contextualize it, but she doesn't get really specific in her descriptions. Yeah. Where I think that comes from. And I think that's really important with the church, because the church is as much of a symbol in the story as it is a location. Yeah. Like, it's a character in the story as it is a location. Which we've talked before is, like, a good trait to have when you're working through a setting or a space. Like, you want... Some spaces should be a character.
I agree.
And I think the church qualifies in that regard. And it's something... like, that's important to the story that isn't as heavy-handed as the other
But on top
elements.
of that, I definitely think it's a sanctuary in the literal sense of hiding from the law and a place of reprieve from everything they're going through where they can just be. Yeah. And I think that's important as well. This book is definitely a time capsule.
Oh, man.
It is. But it definitely, this book is definitely a time capsule.
Yeah, it's got a lot of old school slang. It's got a lot of old school, like, references. References, they talk about the Beatles, Elvis. James Dean.
A lot.
They talk about James Dean a lot.
But not just that, but the style, everything that's happening in this setting. All of that is very much time capsule as well. Because, you know, and some of those references may not age very well, but overall, and, like, some of the slang may not age very well, but overall, like, it feels like you're stepping into
a space in the past. Yeah. And it was written in real time, so I think that's pretty important as well, because it's very authentic use of those references and spaces. Yeah. It'd be like if Ready Player One was written in the present day. Yeah. Like, and was just references and stuff. Like, I don't know if it's that extreme, but it's certainly a lot more...
engaging in the world around her at the time that she was in. So when we're reading it, it's like we're stepping back into that.
Exactly, which is good and bad, because I think elements of it will not age well. They won't make sense. It's like Shakespeare. Like, there are some things you have to look up what words mean a lot of the time, because they don't mean anything to us. Yeah. They sound like nonsense, because even though they were common words then, I think it's going to age that way. But I think in the same vein as something like a Shakespeare, not that I'm comparing her to Shakespeare. Yeah. But in that same vein, I think it has enough stick-to-itiveness as far as literary quality
that it'll...
Yeah. I think for sure.
It was a very angsty book.
So much angst.
There was a lot of angst. It was very woe is me at points.
It was a bit bloviating in that sense, because 14-year-old boys like to rage against the machine.
Yeah. And he was in a situation where everyone around him was doing the same. Everyone around him was I'm
very performatively angry.
Yes, performatively angry. That is a great way of saying it.
Thank you.
So
I remember.
for an angry
I know teenage
14-year-old, it's a lot easier to be performatively angry, and some of his anger is definitely performative. I think he's certainly angry his parents died, and he's going through a lot. And then before everything that happens with Johnny, I think all of that is kind of performative anger.
It's definitely
and
Rage
then after
Against the
Johnny, it's real anger. Mm-hmm. And I think
the broken soda bottle is the perfect example of that because someone hands him a broken bottle at the beginning and they're like, I wouldn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And then in the end, he's like, oh, I know what to do with that.
I'm about to mess you up.
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of that, like, change. Like, that's the difference between angst and real anger.
Yeah.
Is that, like, snap of your brain, kind of. That sort of moment where you're like, oh, no, I'm for real now.
Yeah.
I don't have any qualms about handling this situation anymore because I'm prepared
Well, not
for
just
it.
even handling the situation, but before it was like, I'm trying to look tough and look like I know what I'm doing. Whereas in the second one,
I'm just trying to broaden the scope of what it is.
Well, no, I'm agreeing, but I think in the first situation, he's handed a broken soda bottle and he's like, look tough, look scary, hold it scary, but I don't really know what I'm doing.
Don't let it show.
Yeah, but
make one wrong move,
and everyone will know. But in the second situation, he instinctively broke it, turned it the way he's seen it been turned. Turned?
Yeah. We're having a hard time with words tonight, guys.
And then just, like, going for it, kind of. The lack of his caring of how he looked.
Yeah. He wasn't thinking about his image anymore, and that's what made him actually tough.
Yeah.
It was, I'm just thinking about, oh, I'm never going through this again.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
And it's that moment, that's a very adult feeling to have.
Yeah, I've had enough.
I'm done now.
Yeah.
That's where Karens are born.
But it's a very angsty tone.
Yeah. It's a lot more inconsistent tonally than I remember. And I think that's where I had a hard time connecting with it as an adult.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is just because teenagers are not tonally consistent humans.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But I do, and I think some of it is inexperience.
Yeah, she's
I don't want to let her completely off the hook because I've, really dug into, like, Ali Condi and, like, some of these other people. Like,
Well, she had one big hand wave, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah. But I will say, I think just because you hand waved it doesn't mean it doesn't come from a place of inexperience.
I agree.
So
there were definitely things in this, like, it was a little bit inconsistent tonally. She does a good job with time overall. Especially whenever he's going through shock. I like the way she uses time for pacing. Yes. That's really nice. But then, especially towards the end, it kind of felt a bit disjointed. Yeah. Especially the very, very end where he's writing the paper. Mm-hmm. That part, to me, felt pretty disjointed from the rest of the story. Because time-wise, it didn't really...
That felt intentional to me, and we discussed this when we were writing the thing. Like, that felt very intentional. And even if it wasn't, I think it fits very well as a way to tie back into the fact that Ponyboy is experiencing shock and trauma.
Yeah, that's true.
And his sense of what is real and what is time is wrong. Yeah. Now. And since he's our narrator, it affects everything. Yeah. And so it affects the pace of the story. And I think that's a very clever narration trick. Yeah. It's one of those things I really like when an author does that too. And they put that extra attention into the structure of a story to reinforce their themes and ideas.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like I said, she handles the shock part of time well.
Extremely well. I think maybe what she has an issue with is the amorphousness of the past. Because we did discuss briefly, it doesn't feel like the parents were ever actually alive. It feels like Derry's been in charge of them forever because of the way she talks about Ponyboy and Soda's past with Derry. Yeah. She talks about all of these things that could not possibly have happened in the time span of a year. Yeah. It feels like. And that's just, I think, teens not knowing how time works.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have made more sense if Derry were like 21 and it had happened like 3 years ago.
Yeah, like if maybe...
When he was 18.
Exactly.
Right, when he got the scholarship. Mm-hmm. Like, instead of, he's 20, it happened about 8 months ago. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really fit.
Yeah. There's some weird timeness.
Timey-wimey.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense because he wouldn't have had to lose his scholarship at 19. That doesn't make sense at all.
I mean,
so,
unless yeah.
It doesn't because his other person is a sophomore. They even talk about it. His the rival Soch that he fights in the Rumble is a sophomore in college. Mm-hmm. So that's where he would have been.
Yeah.
So that doesn't make any sense. And so we just want to bring that up.
Time is kind of weird.
Time is kind of weird. I do think that stylistically it's used very effectively. That sort of quick pace,
I agree,
is very good for it. Also really reinforces the grittiness of the story, which this is the very first grimdark YA novel.
People were shocked when this book came out.
It's a shocking book,
and it's banned in a lot of schools.
Really?
Yeah, because of the uses of drug violence and gang.
Interesting, because I remember stuff. Go Ask Alice, I think, was banned at our school for a while.
Yeah, it's banned in a couple of schools. Parents don't like it. I think that's dumb. I think this is a good book for young people to read.
It's an extremely good book for young people because it doesn't do a lot of hand-holding. It does reference violence.
It does. It does handhold.
Because being a teenager can be a very violent experience.
Being a teenager is a violent experience, period.
Absolutely.
It is.
It's you're forcibly growing into adulthood.
And yes, I think, I understand, I guess, kind of, the whole not wanting your kids to read about drugs and sex and violence and all that. But I don't think the book is super explicit, and I think
it's so authentic.
It's real.
It's so authentic to her experience, I think, and it's very authentic to what we've heard about our family's experiences from that time, and it's authentic to the universal teen experience. I think
that's why it still holds true to so many young people, and why some schools are still studying it, because there's always going to be that sense of otherness and groups that break into factions and things like that, and I think it's important to recognize that and I have a hard time. I don't think that you should just let kids read whatever. However, I do have some issue with censoring books for young adults, especially
when they're this inoffensive.
Yeah, I mean, it has things in it that I could see some sort of problematic, but you could always talk to your kid about that. Your young adult, and say, hey, and I think, too, it comes from a place of ignorance in parents, either not reading it or because they don't realize that this is literally happening in the high school right now.
Exactly. Or they misunderstand the slang.
Yeah.
I think because there are some slang that in the book that are used that don't mean the same thing anymore, but are still drug slangs.
Yeah.
Weed, referring to cigarettes as weeds or sticks. Mm-hmm. Those are both now weed terms. Referring to something as a stick is another word for a blunt. Mm-hmm. And then you have things like talking about alcohol is getting stoned on alcohol was an old way of talking about you drinking.
Yeah.
And so when you hear, Hank Williams came up in the book as hokey as well, but even he talks in some of his songs about getting stoned, and he's not talking about getting stoned on marijuana, he's talking about getting stoned on whiskey.
Yeah.
And it's just a change that I
think
that phraseology has shifted.
I just made that up.
I like it. I don't know if you're lying to me, but I will take it.
If someone else has made it up, I've never heard it. I think I made it up. I'm Shakespeare now.
You're Shakespeare. Kayla are Shakespeare now.
I'm calling this an elbow. But yeah, it's very much that phraseology that's offended parents, I think. And also the ignorance of not realizing that some of the stuff is stuff that their kids are experiencing. Well, I keep saying young adults are experiencing now.
It's not ignorance. It is actively hoping these things aren't happening and pretending that by banning a book that teens aren't doing the things that teens have been doing for time immemorial. Yeah. They are young adults. They're full of hormones and they want to do all rage. The drugs. They're full of anger and hormones. And and pizza probably.
Yeah. And I think, I think it misses the point of the book, which is essentially
this is the experience of being a young adult. It's a violent and scary experience where you're ripped into adulthood against your will. And that's being a teen. Mm-hmm. And to that end, that's sort of stylistically, it's got really good structure. This book is structured very effectively.
I think it was very smart for her to write this as Pony Boy's project. So the book starts as I walked out of the dark theater, blah, 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 I had two things on my mind, Paul Newman and a ride home. And then the book begins, and we take off into the story. And as we take off into the story, different things happen. And at the end, as Ponyboy's working through his trauma, he's failing one of his classes, his writing class.
Yeah.
And his teacher's like, just write me something, man. Mm-hmm. Like, just do something so I can pass you in this class, essentially. And Ponyboy decides to write his experience, and he starts out with the first sentence of the book. As I walked out of the blah, 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 I had two things on my mind, Paul Newman and a ride home. And the book is his writing project. Mm-hmm. And it was really clever of her to do this for a couple of reasons. Because it's a big hand wave for any mistakes she might make, because it's Ponyboy talking, not her. It's a good way for her to self-insert without being accused of self-inserting.
Right.
And I think, too, it gives her sort of a space to have that unreliable narrator.
Yeah, that sort of those inconsistencies that come along with being an inexperienced writer.
Because he's inexperienced.
Exactly. And not just because he's inexperienced, but because you have that, because he's narrating what is a true story for him. Mm-hmm. So you have an element.
Tainted memories.
Exactly.
To an extent.
Memory is always going to be somewhat suspect, which, I think probably could have been another theme in this. There were a lot of themes we gave up after a minute to move on. Like, this already is going to be such a long podcast.
Yeah, and I think, I like Ponyboy's voice a lot. I think it's really strong, and I think she has really good syntax within the story, and she does a good job of, as being Ponyboy, you mentioned, using two vocabularies.
Exactly.
Of, his street side and his academic side. And you can tell he's well-read. I mean, he references, Gone with the Wind, Great Expectations. He is a well-read person.
He talks about Jack London a lot, which I vibed with a lot because I was a Jack London kid, too. Nerds. Am I right? But, and I especially think that's pretty relevant, too, because I think Jack London was extremely a big deal in the 50s.
Yeah.
If you were kind of an academic young person.
So he definitely is well read, but he also is fluent in another language.
Exactly.
And I think that shows really well, and she does a good job of that with her sentence structure of these short, choppy sentences followed by these sort of lilting, drifty sentences. Mm-hmm. That said, I did not catch this when I was younger. So I read this book in 8th grade for the first time. Mm-hmm. I loved it. I read it every year. I never, ever, ever got frustrated with it the way I got frustrated with Catcher in the Rye. Mm-hmm. But as an adult, she is definitely a Salinger fan. Yeah. There is no way she hasn't read Catcher in the Rye. Yeah. It is so reminiscent of his style to me.
But I think I would agree with that.
And Catcher in the Rye is kind of young. I mean, it's a young adult novel.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
As well. It's coming of age. So it feels a lot like Catcher in the Rye in terms of bogusness of
everybody's such a phony.
Yeah, and also in terms of radicalness of the story and where it goes, and the willingness to go there, and also the rambliness. Yeah. And I didn't notice it when I was younger as much.
I think it's because teens are rambly people.
I know, but when I read Catcher in the Rye, I just kept getting frustrated because I was like, get to the point. Mm-hmm. You've been talking about the dormitories for 3 pages. Right. And it doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. Get back to it. Mm-hmm. Whereas when Ponyboy did it, I didn't as much feel that way. Mm-hmm. Though now I'm an adult, I see that crossover a lot more. So I'd like to know how much Salinger she reads. I really would like to find that out because
it's definitely got a lot of... Yeah. But I think that's a cool thing, seeing how, because this is the first one we can say, I think unequivocally, was not influenced by The Giver.
It was not.
I think this is the first book in our pile that we can definitely say that's true for. Yeah. Or maybe, well...
No, there were others.
Lord Alexander, probably not, but...
I mean, there were others too, but this one, I didn't feel like this one was influenced by any of the books that we read. I do feel like some of the books that we read were influenced by this one.
Yes, absolutely. And this is going to sound wild, and we may have to cut this out, but this whole time I've been thinking about the plot of this book, and it's made me realize it almost is exactly the plot of American History X, the film about Ed Norton being a Nazi.
I haven't watched that.
Oh, never mind. The plot is the same, and it's wild. My brain hurts now. I'm like, oh God. They ripped off the plot of The Outsiders for that movie and made everybody Nazis.
It was really smart of her, I think, to write the project as Ponyboy's project because it kind of gave her space to play.
Yeah.
But on top of that, it was structurally strong on its own. I wrote structurally strong.
Structurally strong.
But it was very structurally strong on its own in that she did a good job of getting... There was a lot that happened in the book. There were a lot of events. There were a lot of emotions that had to be felt. There was a lot of growth.
And she carries it from beginning to end very flawlessly, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't feel like it was super rushed the whole time. I didn't feel like it really dragged the whole time. It's a very condensed book. And the pacing felt very natural. Ponyboy's growth, Ponyboy's emotional, yes, there was some inconsistencies in tone, but his emotional, well-being, I felt like was well-placed. He and Johnny went into shock after they got on the train, kind of. And then they got to the church and they realized what they'd done and they started crying. They didn't know what to do moving forward. And then they kind of got over it and they're like, we're going to be okay. We're just going to do the next thing. Get through it. And then the fire happened and they're like, we're good. We're doing good. And then the rumble happened, and you can see Ponyboy starting to kind of descend and realize that things are deteriorating. And then after Johnny dies, the deterioration between that and then Dally dying, and then Ponyboy waking up and being like, Johnny didn't die. Yeah. I killed Rob. Bob, whatever.
His name's Robert.
Yeah. That sort of denial that he's just had too much happen in such a short time that he just can't
anymore, yeah.
It felt very natural and real, and it does not, the structure of it is very well done, and I don't know how much of that was S.E. Hinton as a 16-year-old, and how much of that was her editor.
Yeah, and I will say, there's nothing wrong with having a very good editor.
There is not.
In fact, find your soulmate editor, writers. Get out there.
It's important.
That person is out there.
Yeah.
A good editor thinks about your story differently than you do.
And that's a good thing.
Exactly. They are not afraid to kill your baby. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And you need that. But you also, need someone you can communicate well with.
Yeah.
And moving on.
There was a lot of symbolism in this book.
Symbolism?
There was so much. The symbolism I wanted to talk about was the poetry.
Poetry itself.
And the sunset and sunrise.
Poetry itself is symbolism in the story, which I think is really fun. That's a really fun thing to do to poetry, because it's very meta.
It is, and I like it. But on top of that, the poem itself talks about, the sunrise and how the mist of sunrise can't stay forever because the day must go on and growth happens, essentially. You have to grow up. Maturity is real. You can't stay a child forever. Nothing pure in this world will remain pure forever.
Exactly.
And, of course, that's Ponyboy. And Johnny to an extent, but mostly Ponyboy. But sunrises and sunsets on their own are also symbolic in this.
Yeah.
And she kind of points at the symbolism a little bit, but...
She seems to have a very tenuous grasp on how to use symbolism in this story. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think that makes a lot of the elements of the story really flexible for discussion, which I love. But
plus it works because it's in Ponyboy's perspective.
Exactly. Well, but from the perspective of an analyst, it is a little bit sloppy that sunrises and sunsets are symbolic in both the poem that is a symbol in the story and differently symbolic within the story.
Well, I think there's,
and that's just like a, young writer thing, I think. I think that's a new writer thing.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested. You've read more of her other work than I have, and what little I've read of the extended universe it's been decades. So
it's been a while.
I don't know how much of that she goes into thematically in other stories and where that growth.
I have to go back. I haven't read Text or That Was Then, This Is Now in a long time.
Or Rumblefish, or there's a lot of good ones, but I also feel like Weapons were kind of iffy about what exactly they were trying to be symbolic of.
Yeah, because part of it was the symbolic of their pride, and then part of it was symbolic of the violence that they were experiencing every day, which is what a weapon is.
I was about to say, ¿Por qué no las dos? I think that's definitely what she was going for, but I think it was too wide of a net. Yeah. I think Weapons also ended up becoming a stand-in for a few other things, and when you're talking about creating intentional symbolism and the way that weapons are definitely in this book, I think. you really want it to be very focused to your theme. And while we did talk about how much I love the structure of this book in a lot of ways, I think the symbolism is probably the weakest part. It's also
heavy-handed.
I think it's also the thing she tried the hardest at.
Yeah.
It seems like. And it just felt more like inexperience.
Yeah.
I think the most effective symbol was probably hair. That was her most effective intentional symbol, I think.
Intentional.
I think...
We'll talk about the hair, and then we can talk about her 2 unintentional ones.
Yes.
So the hair.
Yes. Hair is
her glory.
Yes. And as someone whose hair changes a lot, I take my hair very seriously. Mm-hmm. Not because I care that it looks good, but because hair is identity putty. You can change so much about yourself just by changing your hair.
I don't care about hair.
Exactly, but these guys do.
Yeah, no, I just mean in terms of like...
They wear their hair like armor in the same way that some women wear lipstick like armor.
I agree.
And it's so funny because it always makes me think of Grandpa when they're talking about the hair in this book, because he's, to this day, is obsessed with making sure his hair always looks good.
Yep.
And he's obsessed with making sure our hair always looks good.
Yeah. So when we were little, he would like sit us down every day after our bath and brush our hair out and like braid it and like fix it. Our grandpa was the one that did that.
Yes.
Because
every night.
He was obsessed with hair.
He wanted to make sure our hair stayed healthy, and like it was just important to him because hair is an important symbol to people from this generation, I think. It means a lot. Yeah. Because for the first time ever, you were showing your hair. You didn't have a hat on all the time. And so I think that was definitely an intentional symbol because it certainly brought up a lot. Ponyboy makes the subtext text quite a bit in the story. Does. That is one of the weaker elements. But when they're on the run, they have to cut and he has to bleach his hair. Mm-hmm. And he talks about it's like having his identity ripped away. Yeah.
He is so emotional about this hair. Mm-hmm. He's probably more emotional about his hair than everything else that's happened. But they say like, it's just hair.
Because to him, it's a symbol of his identity. Yeah. Like, it's not just hair. It's never just hair. Yeah. And anybody who thinks it is just hair has lost their minds. And they clearly don't live in the same culture we do. Like...
I mean, I think
it's not just hair. Like, would you... Okay, so I shaved my head off for an art project. Would you shave your head off? All your hair off your head?
I think if it weren't for the job that I have, probably. I don't really care.
Yeah?
Yeah. But I usually just let my hair grow really long and then I just cut it really short.
That's fair.
So.
Yeah, you are pretty, like, uninvolved with your hair. Like, I just get so... I'm always wanting to do something new or, like, play with how people look at me.
Well, and I think hair is important. And I think... As much as I don't really care about my hair, I still care about my hair. Like, I want my hair to look healthy. I want it to, be
you
clean.
Can't deny that it's culturally, it means something.
Yeah, it does, I think.
Like...
and I think to them, especially, it's all that they can control in a lot of ways, socially. Like, they don't have money, they don't have brand names.
They can't buy nice clothes, they
and,
can't have nice
Boy
cars.
at one point talks about looking down and realizing that he's, like, wearing cut-off sweats. And, like, I mean, he didn't notice before because he and his friends are all... not super well off, but their hair is something that they have power over socially.
Always, yeah.
And I think that's why. And also, it's kind of a big FU to everybody who looks down on them.
Exactly. It's like a defiant thing. Mm-hmm. It's an armor. It's a piece of armor.
So some of the unintentional symbols that
this one I thought was this. I'm pretty sure is. I'm not sure if the rings are unintentional as a symbol. They're certainly supposed to be a visual through line in the story. Yes. But they become symbolically important, I think. And they're probably one of the strongest symbols in the story, in my opinion, because they're the most focused.
I agree.
Just because the rings symbolize trauma at the hands of wealthy oppressors, period. Yep. And that is Johnny's experience. And every time those rings flash or they get brought up, it is always a trigger for Johnny. Yeah. And it becomes a trigger for Pony. That experience of living at the mercy of people who never get told no becomes a trigger. Yeah. Which is, I think, extremely deep for someone 16 years old to write.
Agree.
Like, it's such a potent symbol because I think, A, unintentional symbols, I think, tend to be that way.
I agree.
And B, because it's just so laser focused.
The other unintentional symbol,
this is the one you picked up on,
would be fire and cigarettes.
Yes.
On top of that, but fire in general. At one point, Ponyboy talks about wondering what it would be like to be inside an ember. And there are multiple times where like fire and the embers of things kind of get brought up. And then of course we have the church fire that they run into, which, you know, he talks about, now I know what it's like to be inside an ember. It's like being in hell. And then, you know, Johnny gets crushed by the fire, and like, it's a huge, I think the fire is really, really reminiscent of, in my opinion, the out of controlness of their world.
Yeah, it just makes me think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
That's
to some extent,
too,
but I don't think that was intentional.
No, I think it's essentially, you know, fire is out of control, and I think unintentionally, Hinton brought in that sort of out of control. People get hurt. Fire is a powerful force that you can't really fight against.
But you do have to learn how to like experience,
walk through it type thing. And I think I don't think that was intentional, but I definitely think it was there.
And to that same end, or as a sub-genre of that, I think cigarettes as a symbol, because they're always associated with the appearance. It's their way of making sure they appear to calm down or appear to have things under control. So that controlling fire, it's literally controlling the. So I think that really ties in with your claim, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, no, I think, it's calming them down, appearing tough. It is controlling that flame.
It's literally controlling the fire.
Yeah. And I think the last thing, like, book-wise, that we really want to discuss was the author's intention.
Yes, that's the last thing I've got. It was really important to us both to end on this book, because this is such a big one for us, like, personally, but it's a big one for YA fiction as well.
Yeah.
And thematically, Hinton, when she wrote this book, wrote it with the intention. She was very disillusioned with books she had read written for people her age, and they didn't seem real to her or authentic to her experience, because her lived experience was that being a teen isn't bubbly and fun. It's scary a lot of the time, and it can be dangerous. And like you said, being a teenager is a violent experience. And that is how teenagers experience it, almost always. I know very few people who made it out of their teen years like, I was fine. Yeah. Like, it wasn't traumatizing at all to be a teenager. Yeah. Like, it's important to us to highlight that experience in young people, and why it's important to take those experiences seriously and to treat them academically, because our intent's very similar. We want to be able to highlight the sort of, or at least authentically analyze something that isn't necessarily meant for us as an audience.
Well, and I think on top of that, recognizing that like things that are written for teenagers and by teenagers are just as relevant.
Exactly. And just as important and just as raw and literary. Like, I gave this such a high literary score. We'll get to it, but this is definitely my highest of all of them, which is saying something, because I love Lloyd Alexander and I loved The Giver a lot.
Well, and I think, it's her intent was both to, because she felt disillusioned by what she was reading, but also because she just felt disillusioned by the world she was living in. Yeah. I think I talked about this. I think she talked about it in an interview, realizing that her friends were greasers because somebody called them a greaser on the street as an insult, and she had friends that were socias as well. She was kind of in the middle and sort of wanting to explore that both sides. Yeah, it's rough all over. That idea of like everybody's having a hard time, but it originally started as her being angry and trying to make things right on paper, and then sort of recognizing that like
working out the kinks. Yeah. Of being a teenager. Yeah. With literature, with art.
And that to me is what's so big about it, is like, not only is this a phenomenally written book by a very young person, but it it is a book that came from a place of just trying to understand the world better. Mm-hmm. And I think that all art is, in some sense, trying to capture and understand the world better. And I think
communicate that information. I think the communication element is really important, especially for a teen. Mm-hmm. Like, no one ever really did anything like this before her that I'm aware of.
They did, but it wasn't like this.
It wasn't a realistic teen experience.
Well, we talk about Catch on the Rye, but...
Right, that's a good point. But, like, Salinger came... I wonder if Salinger came out after this.
No.
I don't know. Years are hard. I should do some Googling. But, like, I just... Yeah, he was in the 40s, wasn't he?
I think so.
Oh, never mind. But I just...
But it was considered, like, adult. Anyway.
Yeah, I think it's only recently we've recontextualized it as young adult.
The point being of, using art to both try and understand and communicate and create a channel is so big, and for her to have done such a phenomenal job at such a young age is really impressive to me as a writer and as a person.
We had another book in mind for our pre-end of the season finale that would have tied in a bit thematically with the young author thing that we weren't excited about.
We may do it later, so we're not going to tell you what it is, but...
maybe one day if we have a lot of people listening and a Patreon or something, but like for now,
it's locked behind a paywall.
Yeah, no, we're locking that one away. I don't want to do it.
The point being, it's a really good book.
It's important that she is so young and that it was so important to her to write something for someone like her.
Yeah.
And we really wanted to give that same sense of gravitas to the genre from beginning to end. Mm-hmm. So I felt like it was a really thematically appropriate place for us to end on.
Yeah, I agree. I think we were going to end on this one regardless.
Yes, for sure.
This was the first book we decided on, and we knew it was going to be our finale.
We've explored a lot of interesting things about ourselves and about literature doing this, and I think kind of regrounding ourselves in that same space is important.
Yeah, and, I'd love to hear your guys' opinion, both on this book and on sort of the theme of our podcast to an extent, but... Let's talk about the tropes.
The tropes.
This book is interesting in that it has a lot of the tropes, but it kind of made a lot of the tropes, too.
Yeah, it's kind of the trope maker for a lot of these.
So it was interesting doing the tropes count because it is sort of the list in a lot of ways. But so we got 11 out of 15 tropes, which is the same amount that we had for Graceling, which was the most tropes we'd had all season.
Right. So, but this is going to have a significantly higher score from me.
Same. So the tropes that we found were mere descriptions.
Yes, for sure, describing themselves in mirrors.
Crazy hair, we went ahead and...
Kept that one because Ponyboy does have to dye his hair, and because pompadours are a thing.
Yeah. Mean teacher, he specifically talks about a teacher who was mean to him, and we felt it mattered.
And I think there's an element of, like...
Adults being...
Not just adults, but I would even say someone like Derry.
Yeah.
Being a mean teacher to an extent.
Yeah. Allegory of the Cave.
It's like all Allegory of the Cave, man. Like...
Caveman. And outfit descriptions, lots of those.
Oh, yeah. Lots of leather jackets, tight t-shirts.
Love triangle. This one, we were hesitant, but we went ahead and put it on here because of Ponyboy. Not Ponyboy.
Soda Pop.
And also kind of because of Sherry, but mostly because of Soda Pop.
Yeah, it does come up in the story that Sherry
we didn't even talk about that at all.
No, we didn't. Sherry has, who was Bob's girlfriend, also is extremely attracted to Dallas.
Yeah. She likes trouble.
Yeah, she likes trouble.
But also, I think she admires
she's attracted
his
to
strength.
Yeah, a leadership, a type of sort of don't care, devil may care attitude in guys, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what, Ponyboy refers to it as dangerous quality. And I think that's what it is that sort of, who cares?
Dead parents.
Check.
Are on this trope list. Mentor character.
Check.
I'm not like the other girls. Ponyboy is not like the other girls.
Neither is Soda Pop, really.
Yeah. Puberty symbolism.
Yeah.
And person is a lamp. The person who is a lamp is Steve. We did not talk about Steve because Steve
he's
is a lamp.
not important. And we're going to continue to not talk about Steve.
Yeah. So this book was still awesome. I highly recommend it.
Yes, for sure.
We're about to do our scores, but I want to kind of do a quick little overview in saying that this book held up. It's not the same. So good. I definitely, if it landed a lot differently now that I'm older. There was still that nostalgic element, but it landed a lot differently. But it was still really good.
I will say, this book is still every bit as intense as, like, The Giver or any other, like, high-lit type YA book that we've done. They all have this sort of this kind of intensity that only teenagers can, like, muster, I think, because they are the only people in the world with the energy and the brains to have both things. It's like you kids have energy, adults don't, but kids don't have brains and adults do. And it's like this intersection is a dangerous space to be in as a human. It's like too much.
So what did you give this book for literary merit?
I actually gave it a 4.8.
Okay. You gave it a 4.7.
Ooh-wee. So we were closer than I was expecting on that.
Where do you think I was going to give it?
I don't know. Actually, I didn't really have a prediction for you. Oh, okay. I just didn't expect us to be that close to each other, like within a tenth.
Entertainment, I gave it a 4.5. I
have a 4.3.
Oh, okay.
I know. And for overall, I gave it a 4.75.
Yes, like 4.7's good.
4.7? Mm-hmm. Right on. I'm going to go do some math while Kayla makes some announcements.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so this was our season finale. So it's over. Go cry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kidding.
Please cry.
No,
please
so
clap.
This season is over. We want to do 12 books every season so that we have time to really dedicate to the books that we're reading. Mm-hmm. This season, we've kind of figured it out as we went along because we really just wanted to jump into it. But we'd love to hear feedback from you guys and what you'd like to hear, that sort of things. And we are taking suggestions starting now. Mm-hmm. Really starting last week.
But yes,
starting now for books for next season. If there are any books that you would like to hear us discuss, let us know. We're going to kind of compile a list. We might do a Q&A episode sometime in the interim. We're going to take about 3 months-ish off before we come back with our next season. And just kind of let us know like what you think, what you'd like to see, any questions that you have about us or the podcast.
Yeah.
And we'll be happy to answer those in our short Q&A episode that we'll do. We'll also do a list of our books from lowest score to highest score, so that you can kind of go through.
And I might actually rescore The Giver, I'll be honest. I think I've had a better chance to grasp our scaling at this point. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm going to rescore The Giver on literary merit, probably.
Yeah, well, I think we can go through with our actual scores that we did, and then we can go through with our final book list of what we think you should read and what we think is meh and what we think you should let go.
It'll be fun.
And yeah, so let us know what you think.
And speaking of what people think, we finally calculated the scores. Math has happened. And
that was supposed to be a drum roll, but I don't think that's...
It was more like a sexy purr.
Please don't say that.
It was terrible.
Cut it out. Take that out of the podcast.
No. It's the truth. We tell the truth here.
Anyway, drum roll.
The drum roll. We're giving this one a 4.6, which means it's a must-read.
Yeah. For sure. Read it. Go back and read it.
Go read it.
It's a classic for a reason. Yeah. It's really good.
They make them good old school.
I will warn you, which you probably realized listening to this pod, but there is violence.
Yes.
There is murder. There is abuse.
Some
and
mild
mentioned.
Yes, absolutely.
There are some tough themes in this book. So if any of those are difficult for you, know that going in.
It's also gang violence.
Yes.
Is another one. Like, definitely discusses, actual violence between young men.
And a police shooting.
Yeah.
So there's some stuff in this book that
can reopen some trauma for folks.
Yeah. So be aware of that going in. However, it's a very well written book.
So good.
Which, I mean, every time I remember that she was a teenager, I'm just floored.
Mind blown. Yeah.
It's a very well written book. It's a classic for a reason. You should read it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us for this season.
Yes, thank you so much.
It's been really, really great just, having some of you get involved and, try and guess on books, or even say that you want to know the answer, suggesting things that you want to hear. Some of our friends and family have been texting us books that they think we should
just
put
getting
on our
text
list.
messages and stuff is fun.
So, yeah, we love feedback. Any feedback you guys are willing to give, we're
I
willing
like
to
criticism, hurt me.
Please feel free to interact. We won't be posting podcasts for the next couple of months, but we're still going to be available. So,
and we will be posting some bonus content and stuff. Like, we'll be doing probably a bit more active on social media, I hope. But mostly we're going to be spending our break time really getting ready for the next season. And kind of reworking our plans so that next season's even better. Yeah.
So thank you again for joining us through this journey
it was a lot of fun.
books.
I've been Jessica.
I'm Kayla.
And this has been the YA Sisterhood.